Here we go. Today is Sunday, November 3rd, 2019, and this is episode 239 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I'm great. The good question is, how are you?
I'm doing good. Cruising along. Within sight of the end of my medical challenges. In a good way.
That's great news, yeah.
So maybe another couple of weeks, and I'll have one more surgery, and a couple of weeks after that, I'll be hopefully pretty much back to normal.
That's great news. Awesome. So just in time for the holidays, so that should be good.
Indeed.
Then you get to go back to work, so.
Yeah. If they'll have me back, but I think they will.
Yeah.
I hope they will.
Well, somewhere, I mean.
Yeah.
Even if it's at Walmart, yeah.
I'll be trolling on the Twitters and the LinkedIn, I'm sure.
That's right. So anyhow, I am transitioning back into kind of a normal routine. So that couldn't do last week because of post-travel blues, I guess I'll call it.
Your work is very demanding.
It is. But you know, that's what they pay me for, and it's kind of fun. So let's see, just a couple of things to start off with. The normal reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of my employer or Andy's cats. Or maybe they do. I don't know.
I haven't quizzed them all individually on some of these topics.
And then just another thank you out to all of our Patreon donors. Appreciate
absolutely
all of you.
You guys are awesome.
And so with that, we'll jump into some stories. I continue to have some network challenges over here, so we got to get this thing done while it works. So
I can get a kid from down the street to come help you.
Yeah, I need somebody like that. Figure this technology stuff out for me. All right, first story comes from Security Affairs, and the title is Imperva explains how hackers stole AWS API key and access to customer data. So, there's not an incredible amount of detail in this story, but the long and the short of it is that Imperva, who had I think it's been renamed now, but they had this content delivery network service called Incapsula, which was intended to help mitigate the impacts of DDoS attacks.
It was also a cloud WAF, so it meant it was good. It does more than just DDoS. It does.
Well, so it's kind of like Cloudflare, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, Imperva has a really good web application firewall offering that they've had for years. This is them migrating it to cloud and sort of hands-off options for their customers.
Got it. So as you mentioned, they were moving to the cloud as everybody else is. And back in 2017, apparently they created what I assume to be a test environment, and they took a snapshot of their database their customer database at the time, and
their production.
Their production database. I mean, because nobody
for a test. Let's just be clear.
I mean, look, if it's going to work with test data, it should work with production data. So why not just go with the production data?
Well, I'll tell you why not. The rest of the story.
So yeah, it's a little unclear exactly what happened, but this the story seems to indicate that the environment that was set up as a test bed for their migration to cloud was never taken down and was subsequently hacked. And in the process of that hack, the adversary obtained an API key, which allowed them to download the database. So basically all of the Incapsula customers prior to September 2015 I had their email addresses.
2015, 2017.
Sorry.
Yep.
September 15th, 2017. Good catch. Had their email addresses and hashed and salted passwords stolen. So, I mean, not the most horrific breach we've seen by any stretch, but it kind of highlights something that I've seen a fair amount, especially in the mad rush to cloud, and that is, I kind of go back to days gone by, right, with developers and security policies and whatnot being fairly lax when it comes to development environments, and you could kind of get away with it way back then when the development environments were buried inside your company's network and in multiple levels of firewalls, and obviously those never fully worked the way they were intended to. But now we have these development environments just sitting straight out on the internet, and there's really no reason for them to be treated as anything other than production, because, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are.
Yeah, one of the takeaways that Imperva mentioned is that they will now do a better job of auditing and deleting basically no longer needed instances and decommissioning inactive compute instances. What they don't explain at all in either their blog post or the article that references it is the internal compute instance that was created that they were doing these tests on is what got compromised.
Mm-hmm.
They don't in any way explain how it got compromised. They just say it was accessible from the outside world and it contained an AWS API key that gave access. I would like to know how that compute instance got compromised, but they don't tell us at all.
No, they don't. I mean, I presume it's either through some bad SSH password, or there was some kind of crappy vulnerability, or even I kind of wonder if there's some some Capital One style vulnerability where they were able to capture the API key from a misconfigured, ironically misconfigured WAF.
That could be. It doesn't seem to indicate that, but the way they found out is also kind of interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead.
They on August 20th, 2019, they received a portion of the data set from a third party who requested a bug bounty for the find. They don't say whether or not they paid anything out on the bug bounty, but the way this kind of indicates is seems not, but they don't say.
Right. Unsolicited bug bounties are usually don't work very well.
Yeah, and they also are very careful to say that this was not a vulnerability or weakness in their cloud WAF product. This was something else entirely.
Yeah, we just don't know what, though. So anyway, I think that this was interesting on two dimensions. One, it's a security company, but keep in mind, security companies are often like security companies are often like the cobbler's kids not having shoes. I mean, that's the one thing to realize, because to the management of a security company, the company's security product takes care of every single security problem you can imagine. And so oftentimes you end up with bad hygiene in other areas. I don't know anything about Imperva, but I do know a lot about other companies, and it seems like a pretty consistent theme. But the other dimension that was interesting to me, like I said earlier, is there's clearly a mad rush to the cloud, and lots of good reasons, as we've talked about in the past. But I am really concerned about the trends I'm seeing in terms of of kind of managing the environments that get set up in cloud. It's really easy to set up and then just abandon environments, and this seems to be what happened in this particular case. And in the whole rush to zero trust and whatnot, we kind of are I think implicitly taking this position that the inventory of systems that you have matters less, because now you're defining the perimeter around things much more narrowly, and so this kind of highlights why that's not, it's not a full picture. So you still got work to do. Actually, I'd say you have more work to do in some areas than others.
Yeah, the Imperva blog post that's linked in the article also has some interesting takeaways that are worth reviewing on your own if you want to. I don't know that we want to go over all of them here, but what they changed in their process and controls that they changed are a lot of sort of best practices for managing cloud instances as well. Enabling SSO, multi-factor auth, routine pen tests, do analysis, enabling the controls within AWS like CloudTrail and GuardDuty, and ingesting those logs into a SIEM and setting up appropriate alerts on those logs and alerts, and all sorts of interesting stuff that is important, but again, a new skill set that they may not have known. And so it's worth reading if you're working in AWS or equivalents in Google or Azure or your cloud provider of choice.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that's that. Again, the reason I was interested in bringing this up, I really am seeing and feeling personally a lot of this going wrong, right? Just a lot of organizations are not doing a great job here. And it's going to get worse. There's a lot of stuff being set up, and it's not being in AWS and other clouds, and it's not being done well. And over time, this sort of stuff is just going to keep leaking out. And I implore you, please get this stuff under control.
Do you think maybe we can ask the county password inspectors to add cloud architecture investigation to their duties?
Hey, that's a great idea. Like actually, I would put that into like the building code inspector.
Okay, yeah. But the county password inspector comes around more often.
That's true. That's a good point.
But he or she is already pretty overworked with bad passwords, so might be a lot to ask.
True. All right, so let's move on to our next story. This one comes from Ars Technica, and the title is "The Count of Managed Service Providers Getting Hit with Ransomware Mounts." This is probably no major surprise, but in particular, this article points out over the past year, there's been a bunch of managed service providers is probably not the right term, but different types of software as a service and other types of providers have been kind of systematically hit and affected by different types of ransomware, and they point out a bunch of different instances like Billtrust, which is an outsourced invoicing company. Then there were School Insights and TrialWorks and MetroList and a pediatrics organization in Louisiana. And then there were a couple of actual, what I would consider managed IT providers. And, it's interesting because when these organizations get hit, it's not just that organization that gets impacted. And so, whereas if a smaller, medium-sized business gets impacted by ransomware and they're they make widgets or whatever, it's not really big news. But as more and more IT gets outsourced into different kind of best of breed service providers like this, when one of those companies gets hit, it is very recognizable. It creates a big impact in the industry, and I think that's what we're starting to see more of. And as well, a lot of these service providers are competing on profit margin, and so they're maybe not doing everything they should be doing security wise, and and then stuff like this happens. So there's not an incredible amount of actionable detail, but I did want to talk about this because I think we've seen in the past things like APT10, aka CloudHopper, and some other types of adversaries that were really targeting managed service providers and cloud service providers trying to use it as kind of one-stop shopping. And there's no evidence, by the way, that any of the organizations hit in referenced in this article, were hit because they were a service provider. But that's not to say that, we're not going to see that trend, starting to happen.
Yeah, we've got a concentration of risk when we start using, and I think more and more often people are going to be using these. It just makes too much sense to go, to outsource to software as a service. So, but that opens you up to both supply chain attack and concentration of risk. So, in my mind, does it make sense to perhaps war game out what happens if our payroll provider gets ransomware and is shut down for 3 weeks? Do we have a plan? Or is that such a low probability risk that we're not going to spend resources on that, et cetera, right? I mean, different companies have different availability to spend time on these things, and you've got to make a determination of what's the likelihood of this risk with my finite amount of resources. Do I want to come up with a plan to address this low likelihood risk, or is this an existential threat if this were to happen, and I deem it a medium risk, whatever that means in your world, and I need to have a backup plan that I design and exercise. And I think we need to start thinking of that like DR for our software as a service, because, we trust these guys. And what I mean by these guys is these third parties to keep their stuff up. And, you may have contractual obligation for that. But if they get ransomed or ransomware or something else happens, regardless of what's in the contract, they still may go down hard. And even though they owe you money, that may be inconsequential to the disruption to your business. And if that's the case, you probably need to have a backup plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for things like paying employees and certain other critical business processes. You're absolutely right. And as well, different types of businesses I think are exposed in different levels. Like for instance, the pediatrics medical establishment here. If you're a healthcare organization outsourcing some of your IT, the stakes are higher for you, right? Because now it's not just your business; it's also the data of your patients and possibly the ability to deliver care to the patients themselves, like we've seen in some of the recent ransomware attacks on hospitals that have caused them to stop taking new patients. But so a couple of things that I did want to touch on in this article here is we haven't seen a major flare up like NotPetya or WannaCry in some time. Now, granted, they're not really ransomware. Totally on board with that, but I think the thing that concerns me most is these cases here were kind of what I would call pedestrian, right? They're a service provider. They don't probably, except for a couple of those the actual managed IT providers, they don't actually have connections into your network, and they're probably not going to induce risk on you as a organization beyond the non-availability of the service they provide. But other other types of IT service providers, like there was two examples here, Corvell, and what was the other one here? Magnolia Pediatrics, I guess, is a full service IT provider. Anyway, these organizations they actually do have full access in many cases into your environment. They have network access they have administrative access on your systems, and they have the ability to kind of screw up your network. And we've seen that. We talked about this a couple of months ago with a piece of software that a lot of managed services providers used that had some vulnerability and was being used as a conduit to deliver ransomware to their customers. I think that's where we're going to, speaking of concentration risk, I think that's where we're going to start seeing a lot of new threats emerging. And that says to me, when we have partners that come in and manage and have some kind of responsibility in our network, we need to make sure that they have the right controls in place to prevent them from hurting us.
But how do we know? How can we trust that? How can we audit that in a way that is believable and trustable?
So it's a great question, and the only reliable answer I can come up with is that you have to establish some kind of a demarc between you and them that gives you some level of confidence, something that you manage, or maybe you outsource to some other organization. But then it starts to, I think at that point you start to probably dilute the benefit of outsourcing in the first place. But having said that, this stuff is getting pretty pervasive. Yeah. So the other point I wanted to make was these IT service providers are, they're again a concentration of risk, and it's entirely possible that it's not the provider themselves that has some weakness. It could very well be one of their other customers, right? And so a lot of companies outsource their IT because they don't do it well, and they're trying to save money, and so you outsource to some kind of out of control organization outsources to the same provider that you do, and they impose risk on the outsourcer, and then the outsourcer in turn creates risk onto you. I mean, it's just kind of basic epidemiology. So there is no magic. I mean, to the point you were asking about earlier, there isn't a lot of magic. You can, we all do the spreadsheet dance, right? And I don't know that that's ever really helped anybody with anything.
Oh, sure. It helps the sales team get really good at answering objections.
Fair. Yeah, fair. But I mean, in terms of actual making sure controls are in place, because like you said, how are you going to independently verify the answers that are provided?
You could ask to do a pen test of the company, but that might get expensive and political.
Yeah. And probably not the case. The other thing is, I know there are some outsource providers. Again, it's all a matter of money that will, that they will manage your environment, but they'll do it from a more or less a dedicated environment, an environment that's dedicated to you. They won't use shared systems and whatnot. And that's probably the best you're going to get. But even then, you have to wonder, well, exactly how segmented is it actually? So, yeah. But I don't want to kind of leave it like that, right? Because I think for a lot of organizations, it makes good sense to outsource different things, right? Because
certainly. And this isn't a everyday thing for all. Yeah, you're right. It makes a lot of sense to outsource things and use software as a service. Just be cognizant of potential risk.
Yes.
And figure out, don't be surprised, and be scrambling if something were to happen to one of your SaaS solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we'll move on to our last story, and this is also kind of a ransom story, but not really ransomware. So this is from ZDNet, and the title is "City of Johannesburg Held for Ransom by Hacker Gang." This is a bit different type of story. There was an interesting comment by the Grug after this was this came to light. That the activities or the end game of a group that's trying to ransom is to get money. It's not to encrypt your files, right? That's just a means to their end. And so in this particular case, they've found a different means. And the means was they allegedly stole data from the city of Johannesburg, and they were threatening to publish the data publicly if they didn't get, I think it was 3 Bitcoins.
I think it was 4.
Was it 4 Bitcoins? I mean, it was a really small amount relative.
Yeah, it was like $30,000.
Yeah. So
and they alleged that they still had plenty of access in with a number of backdoors and full ownership of the network, and
right.
They could do more nasty things.
Right, and they posted the adversary posted some screenshots of what was allegedly the Active Directory environment for for the city. The city, for their part, they shut everything down. They did not pay the ransom. And to the best of my knowledge, none of the data was ever posted. Don't know why, or, no details beyond that.
The bad guys had a deadline of October 28th, which is come and gone.
Right.
And I was just doing some research for the story, and the most recent updates are a day or so ago, mainly saying that Johannesburg's like, nope, pounds down, we're not giving you money. But nothing about them posting anything.
Right. Right. So we don't know if that's because they didn't actually take anything, or they just figured it's not worth it. It's really unclear, or maybe it's still yet to be released. Really difficult to know. But
well, you know what else is interesting is that Johannesburg took things offline, but has been bringing things back.
Yes.
So I'm also awfully curious, what was their process to assure themselves that what they were bringing back online was clean of compromise and safe? We don't know. They haven't said that yet, but I would be very curious.
Yeah, the attackers alleged to have said that they were quote in control of everything in your city. We also compromised all passwords and sensitive data such as finance and personal population information. And I believe the way this was first identified was that the computers of some of the city employees actually had a ransom note on their screen. So it's not simply just posting on Twitter that, hey, we have all the data for the city of Johannesburg, send us $30,000. Apparently they actually were inside the network for some period of time. So again, the thing that resonated with me again was that post from the Grug that the ransomware right now is the way that the bad guys are trying to squeeze money out of victims, but it's really not the only way that can be done. And as the environment changes, we should expect that the tactics they'll use will change. And by the way, I suspect that the intrusion tactics are probably the same between both. I'm going to guess it's the normal phishing or drive-by malware or open RDP or some other similar type thing. All of these attacks can be kind of traced back to one of those common, well-worn paths. But once they get in there is probably going to change, and more over time. And for example, once we get really, really good at mitigating the impact of ransomware, and there's a lot of stuff coming online, by the way, a lot of really creative products that are doing this pretty effectively, by this, putting in kind of canary files and directories and watching those canary files get modified, and then that locks out accounts. And so over time, the industry will, I expect, get pretty good at mitigating the impacts of ransomware, and so the adversaries are going to have to start changing their tactics. And so this is quite possibly a something that we'll see in the future, which is more concerning, by the way, when you think about it through the lens of like the GDPR, right? Because it's it's depending on the type of organization you are, this is conceivably could have a pretty bad outcome from that perspective.
Indeed.
So
well said.
Yeah. So it kind of goes back to the fundamentals. Certainly we need to continue advancing the state of the art and mitigating ransomware, but I think we also have to continue advancing our ability to defend the initial intrusion in the first place, and identify and minimize the dwell time once someone gets in. And because if you do that, then you don't care so much exactly what technique they're going to try to use to extort money out of you. So, yeah, there you go.
Fair enough.
Anyhow, that's the set of stories for tonight. So thanks all for listening.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Hopefully we'll start to get on a bit of a more regular cadence now that Jerry's epic month of travel is wound down for a little while. And I'm feeling better, so hopefully you hear from us. I mean, I do have one more surgery coming up, so I will disappear for a little while towards the end of this month, I think. It's not scheduled yet, but hopefully it won't be too bad of a recovery, and you won't miss me too much.
The last of those cyborg implants is going in, huh?
I'm really not supposed to talk about that. You know that.
Fair enough. All right. Well,
but how else am I supposed to go on secret missions with Airwolf if I don't have the implants?
That's true. You can't control Knight Rider with your mind if you don't have the implants, right?
That's what I keep telling my wife.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Have a great week, and we'll talk again soon.
See you guys. Have a good week. Bye.
Take care. Bye.